Good evening and welcome to the Working Tools Podcast. Tonight we'll be discussing membership, retention, and engagement with Very Worth brother Zane McCune. Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com. Welcome back to the Working Tools Podcast. I'm David Colbeth. I'm a Master Mason here in the Grand Lodge of Washington, and we have two of our other regular hosts, Worship Brother Steve Chung and Worship Brother Jared Dunham, both from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia, Yukon. We're missing our third regular host, Matt Apple, tonight. He's again with family, and we think of him and his family in these times. But again, we're joined this evening again by Very Worshipful Zane McCune. He was with us in a multi-part series on membership, retention, and engagement recently, and we're now into part 3. Maybe we'll have a part 4. I don't know. We'll see how this one goes. We went down the rabbit hole of membership and retention pretty heavily. Tonight, we're going to try and focus on retention and engagement and kind of the experience that a lodge can provide to a new guy. So what would you recommend, Very Worshipful Zane, on what a lodge could do for that retention and engagement piece for a new Mason?
Well, sure. Thanks for having me back on the show. And you were saying this is part of a multi-show engagement, and I was just chuckling to myself, thinking, hard to have me on the show, not have it be a multi-show engagement. Talk. But it's a good question, and I appreciate you asking. In the last couple of shows, we talked about what lodges have been dealing with, and sort of what to do, and the focus being that retention would be the solution to a lot of what lodges are experiencing. And through that retention, or I guess sort of the pathway to retention, from my experience, has been to really focus on creating a quality experience in a lodge. And so everything that you do is filtered through the lens of quality. And one of the books that was instrumental to our lodge in this endeavor was a book by Andrew Hammer called Observing the Craft, The Pursuit of Excellence. And there were some other books and some other key people that helped our lodge kind of shift into a different direction. But it all started when several of us read Observing the Craft. So I can, there were 8 steps to that. I'd love to talk about those 8 steps. Curious if David or Stephen or Jared, if you are familiar with that book or had met Andrew, or just if you had any initial thoughts on that.
Well, I've actually read it multiple times. I think I read it every year or so.
Right.
I picked it up because when I went back to lodge about 6 years ago, I joined a lodge that was failing, and the first thing I did was start picking up books to try and help figure out a way to make the lodge succeed. And that one has been, like, Observing the Craft has probably been the one that has influenced me the most.
Yeah. Yep, I've read it more than once. I've had the privilege of meeting Andrew several times, of having group discussion with him. I've had some one-on-one discussion with him as well, and it's always a real treat. So I would say, first of all, if you haven't, to the listeners, if you haven't picked up that book, and it's not very expensive. This is not a history book or an esoteric discussion by any stretch of the imagination, and I would call it more of like a call to arms. Like, here's the rescue plan.
Like a manifesto.
Like almost like a manifesto. Yeah, exactly. So he gets into these 8 steps. I would say that in our experience in our lodge, we've probably got 1 or 2 more that we really added to that. So maybe 10. It'll be really difficult to get through all of these in a single session, but we'll plow through. I'll just say, maybe at the beginning of the show here are what the 8 are. And they are guarding the West Gate, a focus on lodge proficiency and ritual, and an intentional advancement through the degrees, progression in the officer line through merit, and then the back four are attire and lodge. We added our lodge implements, but sort of the accoutrements of the lodge. 6 is the idea of paying for quality and stepping up in that endeavor. 7 is creating a contemplative atmosphere, and 8 is Masonic education at every meeting, which is really kind of I think the secret recipe to every good Masonic meeting. So those are the 8 that, if we want to dive into any of those, or if we want to try to tackle those in order, or kind of what our lodge did, I'm game for any or all.
Well, on one of the other shows, we talked about how to make sure that your lodge focuses on what it wants to focus on, its culture, whatever. And we brushed on the idea of the standing rules concept, or how can you ensure that a lodge does that? And so have you placed these 8 elements basically into your standing rules, or is it something, how do, and maybe we can get into it later too, once we cover them, but how would a lodge ensure that what it wants to be done is done?
So to some extent, yeah, we have incorporated some of these into our bylaws, not necessarily as a standing rule, although number 8, we did Masonic education every meeting. We did add that as a standing rule, that the worshipful master in our lodge is required to either provide or coordinate Masonic education at every meeting, which seems like an obvious thing. Why would you have to put that into your bylaw? But when you have a content-free meeting and you have several in a row, and they get kind of boring, it can have an impact to the lodge.
Do you guys not have like a director of education that does a education piece at each meeting?
Well, not a officer role called the director of education. I think that's a interestingly, I think that is a great idea to have somebody coordinate that, whether they give it or whether they coordinate it with a neighboring group or a neighboring Mason, or bringing in a guest speaker. I guess that's in our lodge. That's the I would kind of say the interpretation of to set the craft of work and give them good and wholesome instruction. That's what we charge the worshipful master to do. We've just gone the extra step of adding that to our lodge bylaws in a standing resolution. It's a little bit of extra teeth to say, if you don't provide Masonic education, you're violating your bylaws. So don't do that.
That's pretty cool. I like the idea of having it in the bylaws. So we task our worshipful masters with the same thing, but he has a director of education that he can direct to give us education at each meeting. Yeah. And I guess it's that important they made an office for it. And that guy's job is solely to focus on having education ready to present at the request of the worshipful master.
Yeah. I would say, I know in the title we talked about retention and engagement, and it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg remark, I think, to some extent, because you will get retention from engaged Masons. They will stay, I guess. If you have engaged Masons, they are sticking around. So that is retention. But how do you get engaged Masons? And that, I think, comes from creating a quality Masonic experience. And one of the ways that you can get brothers to engage is to take ownership of that. Well, first of all of these 8 steps, but within the context of Masonic education, rather than in our lodge, rather than having one person always be the education officer, it's how do we get brothers in the lodge to step up and provide some kind of Masonic education? And if that doesn't fit all of our meetings, how do we essentially bring in Masonic education? And our lodge has always been committed to paying for outside speakers. We'll fly them in and not only present to the lodge, but we'll invite the whole district to come. And we've had Andrew Hammer come in, and we've had a number of other brothers from all over the country and locally too. The Philalethe Society has a chapter down in Portland, and so that's a 3-hour drive away from Seattle. And we've had we've had several of their speakers come up in a group context to do a whole thing. So that's the worshipful master's job within the context of that 8th step, is to coordinate the education, whether he delivers it himself, has a brother in the lodge who gives it, or we bring somebody from outside to speak. Masonic education is always very prevalent in our Masonic meetings.
Before we dive into these in too much detail, in your discussions with Andrew or in your experience, are they in any particular order? Was there a design to the order, or was it just kind of here's how it makes sense in a printed format or in a readable format?
Good question. No, there isn't any particular order. And what he has said and what I would echo is that there isn't a prescribed way to apply each one of these steps. You do what works best for your lodge, but tackle these topics within your lodge. So, one of the things might be attire and other lodge accoutrement. So attire, does that have to be tuxedos? We're our tuxedo lodge, but not every lodge is a tuxedo lodge. So that's okay. What his point of attire is that it's worth endeavoring a lodge to have a common look of the lodge. So if officers all wear the same shirt or all wear the same tie, you're indicating that you're part of the team. It's the same reason that sports teams all wear the same jersey. They're part of the team. And so as Masons in a lodge, we can create that same bond between the brothers in the lodge as well. It doesn't have to be a tuxedo. What works for your lodge might be different than another lodge, but the idea is that attire is addressed as a topic.
I think actually attire is actually addressed in our constitution and regulations up here. It's not a gray area. I believe it specifically says that it's dark suit and tie. And officers are supposed to dress. I'm trying to remember if it's actually in our constitutions or if it's just the many bylaws that I've read.
Where's Trevor when we need him?
Right.
Well, I know that our bylaws say that it suits it. We anything less is not acceptable.
I know our lodge officer's handbook references that.
Our lodge officer's handbook references, but as far as I can tell, our lodge officer's handbook is not a code. So sure, it's but the other thing that goes along with attire besides just dark suits and dark ties. So another thing we did on the just as a way to kind of our lodge does it is when we do a 3rd degree, we have all of our brothers wear white aprons and white gloves for the whole meeting. Nobody wears their adorned aprons, past master's apron or otherwise. We all wear white, and there is something kind of cool to that really classic look. And on a 3rd degree conferral, when you've got 20 brothers all very much uniform in their dark suits and white gloves and white aprons, it's really sharp.
There's a show in there, a question about the officers not wearing their officer apron, but maybe that's a different show.
Well, he's wearing his apron that he was initiated with. So, and it still has square corners. So, but the rest. So some of these are some of these 8 items are kind of form, and maybe some of them are substance. And so the combined effort is what is necessary.
Well, and if you were to think about, if you said, oh yeah, they are in order. Well, guarding the West Gate's important, but if you're not prepared, having quality education, having a standard of dress, having all those excellent ritual, having those things in place so that when a new guy comes in, he has a great experience, you've kind of failed all over the place. You can guard the West Gate all day, but if these other 7 pieces aren't in place.
Yep. And no, that's a fair point as well. One of the comments I get because I teach every year at Lodge Leadership Retreat, it invariably, like in any of the classes or after the classes, guys will come up to me and say, we're super excited. We've got a couple of new guys in the lodge, and everybody is just very, very excited. But what do we do? I mean, I know that sounds, you know, like kind of a striking question, but it's like they're so excited, but what is the first step? And I don't know that I have like, well, here is the absolute first step you should take, other than I really think everybody in your lodge should read Observing the Craft. But maybe even more tactical about guarding the West Gate is another point. Like, here's what our lodge did in guarding the West Gate. So specifically what we did. So implemented the 6 steps, which I'm sure there's a whole show somewhere in this catalog about the 6 steps. But the whole point of that is to get to know a candidate, or to get to know a potential candidate before he petitions the lodge. But even so, just making sure that we have given him plenty of time to get to know us, and we get to know him, but more so ask him what he is looking for in Freemasonry. And we're very upfront about what kind of lodge we are. Our lodge is focused on Masonic education, philosophical discussion. Yes, we have charitable endeavors. Yes, we have fun out on, brotherhood events. But our lodge is, very focused on education and ritual. And if that's not of interest to him, let's find a lodge that is nearby that, maybe he's much more into, charitable work. And ours is, we have some charitable work, but that's not the main emphasis of our lodge. And so if that's something that he's really passionate about, maybe in our lodge is not a right fit. And so we'll help him find another lodge. I guess the idea is let's match up potential Masons with lodges that are going to be of interest to him and where he will succeed. And so that's part of guarding the West Gate, is also just making sure that we're participating in that dialogue. And we know the other lodges in the area that are also, having those same conversations. And I think we all benefit if we were to all have that conversation. So that we kind of log that into guarding the West Gate.
And if you look at what the traditional approach that talks about the 6 steps, the traditional approach is that you know somebody from work or from from your social activities, or a neighbor, or some friend of yours you've known. You've already had the chance to get to know that man, and so you might recommend him, but you might think, oh yeah, he wants to be part of this. He's more into bowling, right? And so this lodge over here really likes to bowl every Sunday. And so wouldn't you automatically say, hey, you should probably talk to Sam over here on the bowling lodge, because you probably get along with him. We're like, oh, here, let's go bowling with Sam in his lodge and hang out.
Yeah.
And he probably would petition there because they're the bowling guys. And so,
I mean, to some extent, that's the term, that's affinity, right? And there are some lodges that are seeing success in having kind of that affinity model, whatever you kind of, fill in the blank. I had a guy approach me one time and he said, I really want to be a Shriner. And I said, you know what? I think that's fantastic. Not one brother in our lodge is a Shriner. And you should join this lodge 15 minutes away, where half the guys in there are Shriners and the worshipful master is, currently the potentate. Like, you should be in that lodge. That's where you should be. And we directed him over there and he joined that lodge. And, we didn't have this like, oh, we need to have him in our lodge because we need to pump up our numbers. And that's all what it's all about. We're trying to find the right home for the right Mason, or for the right potential Mason.
Do you have you turned any of these into questions that when you give it to a person at your lodge leadership retreat and they ask, what should we do next? Do you have a series of questions that a lodge could use with each of these things to say, here's what a question that we contemplated for the lodge and the officers to answer to solve that guarding the West Gate for them, other than 6 steps? I mean, it's just say basically follow the 6 steps.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a great suggestion, and we've talked about that in the lodge leadership. I brought that up with the chairman of the lodge leadership retreat, Jeremy Yielding, and to some extent, we have those kinds of questions in a new class that we're going to teach at the retreat this in 2022. So hopefully in person. I think it's Another thing that we've done in our lodge is in addition to filling out the petition and everything kind of goes along with that, we have a charge called the Ways of Virtue. And it's not something that's used in the Washington jurisdiction. So it's not part of our Masonic body, but we provide it to like a potential candidate. We have him read it and we have him write a written response about what his response to this charge. He doesn't really know what a Masonic charge is yet, but he just gets this, 8-paragraph thing and he reads it and he's supposed to respond to it. And so we read his response in lodge when we read his petition as well. So we give the brothers, and everybody's had a chance to meet him anyway. So just another part of him getting to know us. And if he's not willing to write a response and kind of dive into something, and that is to some extent him reflecting his disposition about learning new things or contemplating things. If he's not willing to do that, he's not going to be a good fit for our lodge. So we're not trying to keep brothers out necessarily with that. We want to hear what they want, to say about it. But in some extent, it's another filter, soft filter.
Well, that's a good point, and kind of a segue into the next element, the proficiency in Masonic ritual and law, and that you want them to be able to be interested in what ritual is about, right? Not just the rote memorization, although that's a piece of the 6 steps, is that we want the inquirers to do some memorization for several reasons, right? One, to just see, can they do it? Can they memorize something? Do they have the commitment to do it? Do they have the stick-to-itiveness, if you will? And are they internalizing it?
All really good points. Andrew Hammer's point of having this step in the book, though, is more of a charge for the younger guys that are coming into the lodge, and it's the idea that, okay, well, you can, if you have the audacity to complain about the way things are run in the lodge, then what you really need to do is step up and be proficient in the work and become an officer. And as you go through the officer line, change the lodge. And if you're not willing to do that labor, then you have no business complaining about the way that the lodge is being run. And the whole point of that is to step up and learn ritual.
#lean in.
#lean in. Nice. Our lodge has kind of taken this and further refined it to really be this idea of grooming a new generation of ritualists. And our observation has been that the older brothers, not just in our lodge, but in our district, in our jurisdiction, have been doing some heavy lifting for a very, very, very long time. And it's time to share the burden and pick up that weight and walk with it. And that's a great way to appreciate what they've done to keep things moving along in the craft while it's kind of gone through this ebb and hopefully back to a flow. But rather than letting them continue to carry the heavy load, it's up to us, this new generation of ritualists, to carry that heavy load. So we have this development program in our lodge that is essentially, starting off, it's not a passive, what ritual parts would you like to learn? It's, here's the ritual parts that we would like you to learn. And here's the somewhat of an order that we want you to learn them in. And as they're going through the degrees, we want you to learn the entire posting lecture. There's nothing a short about that. It's everything. And oh, by the way, after you finish learning the entire posting lecture for all 3 degrees, you're going to be really close to being able to confer a degree when you're a senior deacon or a junior warden. You're almost going to be right there. But even in between becoming a master mason and becoming an officer, there's still this development program. So the idea is to start out with the smaller parts, but then as they, fill and complete those smaller parts, prep them, give them enough time to learn the next bigger part up and the next bigger part up. And the idea behind that is to coach the brothers on the next step that they need to take, not put it into their hands, because a lot of times they don't know. An example would be, all right, great. So you just finished giving the working tools in the Enter Apprentice degree. and maybe without any direction, somebody might say, well, what would you like to do next? I don't know. I'm pretty comfortable with the working tools. Can I do that again? So in our lodge, that dialogue doesn't even happen. We don't even give them that choice. It's not even a line of questioning. It's like, okay, great. We'd like you to learn the apron lecture. Well, you probably already learned it when you did your proficiency in the as you were going up through the degrees, but we'll have you learn the preparatory lecture. We'll have you learn the senior deacon part. Now you're learning the circumambulation. You're learning, the floor work of the degree, and every step along the way, he's going to learn more and more and more ritual. And we ask our officers to take on a conferring master role as they're going up through the senior deacon, junior warden, and senior warden chair as well. And so really by the time that they ascend through all of those chairs and become worshipful master of our lodge, they have their proficiency in lodge management. They've conferred all 3 degrees. They've given the posting lecture on all 3 degrees, and their body of work that they know is pretty solid. And our goal in all of this was to be able to confer all 3 degrees using just members of our own lodge, every single part, no exceptions. And that came out of a lecture that we attended where Andrew Hammer said, it was kind of oh boy, that was a shot across the bow to a lot of us when he said, do you deserve the lodge charter that's in your lodge room? And all of us were like, what the heck does that mean? And he's like, for you to get a charter, and he was speaking to a group, he said, for you to have a charter, you had to have 15 master masons who were proficient in all of the work. Do you have 15 master masons that are proficient in the entire work in your lodge? And if the answer is no, then the next step is, how do we get to be able to answer that question? Is yes, I guess
that's exactly where the requirement for dispensation came from. I would like to write a resolution that our lodges should be required to redispensate every 5 to 10 years. I know a lot of jurisdictions have inspection. You guys have inspection season in Canada, don't you? Or I'm sorry. So some East Coast lodges I know have an inspection season every year where they go through and the district deputy will go through and verify that the lodge can perform the work as part of their process. And if they can't, then they go into down here, they call it inspection season.
Yeah, they call it an official visit. And at that official visit, he supposedly goes through the books and whatnot and makes sure that all our stuff is in order.
But do they watch a degree or exemplify a degree?
Not at an official visit.
Okay, the exemplification of a degree or actually conducting a degree is part of the inspection in these other lodges. And if a lodge because that's required as part of, like Zane said, as part of your dispensation to receive your charter, you have to do these 3 or 4 things.
So what we were seeing happen was that lodges would struggle to get brothers to fill roles, and you'd see the same people filling the same roles over and over. So they would just look at what was the degree team from last month or whatever, and that became the degree team for this month, and everybody just kind of rolled over. Well, nobody's learning any new parts, and that in and of itself is that in itself is also a little challenging, because if you're only giving brothers a couple weeks to learn new parts, that's not really enough time. So how do you distance the degrees long enough for brothers to pick up and learn new parts, and who's learning new parts? Which really kind of led to number 3, which was advancement through the degrees. So I'll pause here for a second.
I was just going to say that I think you're right. Is that 2 and 3, just like 1 and 2 tie together, 2 and 3 tie together specifically. If a guy was willing to advance in his education, learning the parts, he's hopefully going to advance through the degree process as well, right?
Well, do we have enough time to hit this in this session?
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so this became a very active topic in our lodge, was how do we advance brothers through the degree? And we made this intentional decision to slow the whole process down. And this was not met without some resistance with some people within the lodge and some plural members within the lodge. They said, no, you can't do that. People wait, you gotta pump them through. And we're like, but they're not learning anything. And if it's just, besides having time to learn an entire posting lecture, what are they really learning? And I think this is an area that I think you could spend as a lodge a lot of time on, refining this process, like a continual feedback loop. Like how do brothers learn about a degree before they advance to the next degree, and how long? And so, Dave, I know that you've had lots of ideas in terms of the further, education within the craft. But the idea is, if you're sitting down and just doing a short order kind of post, version of the lecture, maybe just the obligation, that is significantly shortchanging the new Mason. He's not learning anything other than sort of this rote ritual, which tells him a mode of recognition, and he doesn't even understand what he's reciting, either. So it's, is he reading any books? Is he presenting in lodge? Is he taking the what have we changed the name to it in our jurisdiction, Dave?
Well, I just got off a call for a long range planning committee. So but MDP, Masonic Development Program. It's going to
Masonic Development Program. Thank you. I knew we just changed the name of it. We used to call it the new candidate education program. But the point of all of that is, whatever we call it and whatever it is, the whole point is, what is he learning and what is he doing along the way? And the question you have to ask is, why are you asking this brother to do more than just learning ritual work? It's the whole point of this show, which is retention and engagement. And what brother is going to feel engaged and consequently stay, or you retain him, when he's not really learning anything? It's very exciting to go through all the degrees and the conferrals and the ritual, and it's all very exciting. But what's he really learning along the way? And if he isn't really learning anything, he's going to get to the end of this 3-step, journey, and he's going to ask himself that question too. And if he's come up wanting on that answer, he's like, well, I just invested a lot of time. What was the point of it? And so this is where you as a lodge and as an officer group can spend a lot of time on a feedback, like, what are we doing here? And you don't have to have it all perfect. The next conferral, the next candidate. This is a continual chipping away at the corners of your lodge's rough ashlar, if you think about it like that. So, our lodge, is still in this. So this is not a done thing in our lodge, but this is an active dialogue within the officer group throughout the year.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about barely half of what we really want to get into here tonight. So we've definitely got another segment, and the way we talk, maybe 2 more. We'll see. But
we'll see if we can get it all done in the next one.
At least a part 4 is coming up. I do want to just take a minute to say thank you to all of our subscribers. We just last month were able to exceed 500 subscribers, and so we want to say thank you to everyone that's listening and watching and all that out on YouTube land. And we really appreciate it. So on behalf of myself and Stephen and Jared, I want to say thank you to Virtual Zane for this show tonight, and we'll see you on the next show of the Working Tools Podcast.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here.